Right, so this is our second topic for this week, for those of you who are self-isolating. This is our second memory model. We've done the multi-store model of memory, and now we're looking at the working memory model. So this is a very long presentation, so I'm not going to necessarily talk over every single slide because there are some activities here where I don't really need to. Plus, there's an awful lot going on in this PowerPoint. So let's get on with it, should we? Okay, the first thing we're going to do is play Jeopardy. Now, we would usually play this in teams, and we would see which team got the best, etc. as a competition, but we can't do that. So you're going to have to play it on your own. So with Jeopardy, what happens is it's not like a regular quiz. You are given the answer and you have to provide the question. So for example, if I said Paris, the question would be, what is the capital city of France? Yeah, that's how it goes. There you go, there's the example. So you'll get the hang of it. You are given the answer, you provide the question. So this is just to refresh your memory of the multi-store model of memory. Pardon the pun with that. Before we move on to the working memory models, because you need to bear in mind that these two models see memory slightly differently, and they conceptualize memory in different ways. So before we move on to the working memory model, I would like you to pause the presentation here and come up with the answer to, come up with the questions to all of these answers. Give it a go. Right, I'm assuming that you paused the presentation and you completed all of the questions. So let's see whether you got the answers right. So there you are. The first one is, what is the sensory store? What is the capacity of short-term memory, etc. So just might want to pause it here. Check your answers. If you got any wrong, just make a note of them and correct them. Okay, so you might want to pause the presentation here. Now we're going to move on to a practical task because we're starting our work on the working memory model. In your head, work out how many windows are in your house. Now, there can be windows that are with internal windows, like indoors, or they can be like individual window panes. They can be the whole window. I don't really care. Just work out how many windows are in your house. So pause the presentation here. How did you work out how many windows are in your house? You can't discuss your answer with the person next to you. So just think about what you actually did. What mental process did you go through to count the windows in your house? And this relates to the working memory model. So what is working memory? Have a little research moment here. Have a little look, find out, tell me what is working memory, not the working memory model, but just what is working memory. Yep, it is what you are using right now. Okay, that is working memory. It is short-term memory only. So when we look at the working memory model, we are only concerned with short-term memory. So that's why I put STM in brackets there, because working memory, the model for working memory is not like the model for the multi-store model. It is only looking at short-term memory. So it's the here and now. It's what you're doing right now in the moment as you are using your memory to help you process information. For example, do this sum. Don't use a calculator. Do it in your head. Don't write it. Don't write it down. Just do it in your head now. It's not a difficult sum. Okay, so you should have been able to add that up quite easily in your head. What's the answer? Correct. The answer is 40. Here is one version of the working memory model. You may see it presented slightly differently depending on what textbook you look at, but these are the components. The central executive, these are the three slave systems, right? These two were in the original model. The episodic buffer was added a lot later. We're talking, gosh, from the original model was 1974, and then the episodic buffer was added in the year 2000. So that is 26 years later, if my maths is any good. This here is, well, it's a little bit misleading. This really is the working memory model. This long-term storage, it doesn't really have any kind of function in terms of the working memory model. It's just been added because obviously if you're using your short-term memory, you clearly have to take things from your long-term memory to help you use your working memory. So as I am talking to you now, using my working memory, I'm reaching into and taking things out of my long-term memory of this lesson and of this model. So working memory is not just, it's not the idea that we don't have a long-term memory. It's just the model doesn't really do anything with it. It focuses on short-term memory. So do bear that in mind, that this is very, very, very different to the multi-store model of memory. Here is another version of it. It's exactly the same thing. The central executive, you've got these two main slave systems here, and we will look at what these two aspects of each mean in a little while. And we have the episodic buffer there. And again, long-term memory is there just to kind of acknowledge that we have a long-term memory. Although the model, it doesn't really say anything about long-term memory. So do bear that in mind. This box here is kind of like, well, yeah, of course we have a long-term memory, but the model doesn't really acknowledge that anything about it, because this is the most interesting bit that it wants to talk about, working memory. So these are the components of working memory. So pause the presentation here, read through each one. So you probably read through them and thought, yeah, so what? I still don't know what on earth you mean. Well, let's deal with each of them in turn. Right? The central executive is a bit like, who's this? The Fat Controller from Thomas the Tank Engine. The central executive is the part of the memory that is at the control of the memory, working memory. It decides which slave systems should do which job and when. It's like a manager in a big company deciding that this team will do this job and this team will do that job, and then we'll pull this other team off that one. A bit like the Fat Controller when he's deciding which engines should go on the line, or he's telling the engines off, or making changes to the railway system. Okay? So the central executive comes into play when you are doing something difficult. Yeah, when you are concentrating on different burdens on your working memory. So when you do something that's complex visually, aurally, acoustically, when you've got to process information, when you've got to hold on to information, when you have to decide which information to use and how to use it. Let's say in an exam. In an exam, you have to use all aspects of your working memory, because you have to be able to write that essay, know which parts of the question you're going to focus on, what information you need, and of course you dig into your long-term memory to get that, but you're using your working memory on the job, as it were. If your working memory shut down, you wouldn't be able to write the exam. Okay, you might say, well, I've got long-term memory, I can use my long-term memory. You can't use it without your working memory, because your working memory puts its hand into long-term memory and pulls out the information it needs. Without working memory, your long-term memory is totally useless, because working memory is what we're doing here and now. Some people have processing delays and they have issues with their working memory, and they find it difficult to keep track. I know there are students, and I have worked with students before, who their working memory has a bit of a delay and they don't get things as quickly as students who have a normal working memory. They will process information more slowly. They find it more difficult to reach into their long-term memory to get the information. So this is why working memory is hugely important. So the central executive is thought to have a limited capacity. It can't hold a lot at the time, because if you think about it, in an exam, you can't answer all the questions at once. You wouldn't have 4 questions you were answering at the same time and go between one and then another and then come back and finish. It would just be overloading your central executive. It has to prioritize. It has to know what it's doing right in the here and now, right? So a central executive can deal with any modality. Modality simply means, is it dealing with visual? Is it dealing with acoustic information? Is it dealing with getting those memories from the long-term memory? And if you are interested, you might want to pause the video here and watch this little clip of Thomas the Tank Engine. I couldn't really find a clip of the Fat Controller directing all the trains, but I found one that features the Fat Controller bossing people around. If you start it from about 1 minute 46 into the video, you will see him in a very sexist scene where his wife is serving him breakfast, and you know, she's kind of being his maid. But hey, this is a bit dated, Thomas the Tank Engine. But then he goes on to, you know, sort out the engine, so you might want to have a look at that. My boys used to love Thomas the Tank Engine, so for me it's nostalgia. Right, the phonological loop is your inner voice. Anything with phono means sound, right? It's a Greek phonology, I think, is a Greek word meaning, you know, phono means noise, sound. So the phonological loop is your inner voice. It's the words that you say in your head. Imagine if you are going into a job interview and you're thinking in your head, I really have to remember to tell them about that. Or I mustn't mention that time I set the head teacher's office on fire and, you know, did something really silly at school. I mustn't do that. Or you're repeating something, you're rehearsing a telephone number, etc. So its capacity is limited to the length of time it takes to say the words. So it's something that's very present, very much here and now. It's not going to last very long, which is why you have to keep rehearsing the information. So it's got 2 parts. The articulatory control system is the inner voice. It's talking to you. It's circulating the information. It's doing what we were talking about here. It kind of keeps it on a tape loop. I mean, I know tape loops are old-fashioned, but if something's on a tape loop, it just goes round and round and round the same information until you decide to, you know, stop it or, you know, move on to something else. The phonological store is where you have got your speech-based information for about 2 seconds. If you've ever been in the situation where you've thought, I must remember to say that, and then it goes, you think, I've forgotten what I was going to say, it's because your phonological store in your working memory can only hold the information for about 2 seconds, unless you're just rehearsing it over and over again, in which case you remember to say it. But if it's something that you think, I must say that, and you don't rehearse it, it will move from your phonological store and it's gone. So this is why these systems have very limited capacity and duration, because it's only in your short-term memory. It's not long-term memory, this. This is why if we're going to use some information for the future, we have to rehearse it. We have to get it into the long-term memory. And you start by using it in your working memory. So the VISUOSPATIAL SKETCHPAD is like the inner eye. It's all about visual information. It's all how you take in the world as images. And it also has 2 parts. Now, like the phonological store, we have the visual cache. Now, the visual cache stores information about form and colour. So, for example, I know that is an eye. I know that colour is blue. Yeah? So I'm processing that now as a blue eye with blue eyeshadow and long eyelashes. So I've got that in my visual cache. My inner scribe is giving me information about it. Yeah? So I put that information into my visual cache. I put it there. So the inner scribe is what writes on your memory. It's like a drawing or piece of writing, something you can see. It contains spatial and movement information. So like the articulatory control system, which is acoustic, this is visual rehearsal of information, and you store it in your visual cache. But remember, these are temporary stores. This is not a long-term store. This is what you're using in the here and now to process, pardon me, the information. Now the episodic buffer, you can see that here, is a bit of a strange one. It's a bit vague. It's a little bit vague, all the information about the episodic buffer. And the reason that Baddeley and Hitch, the model's designers, added it to the model 26 years after the original version was that there was criticism about this model, that researchers and other people were saying, well, what about long-term memory? How can your working memory happen without having some relationship to long-term memory? So they added this episodic buffer, and it's a little bit vague. It's not exactly easy to understand. It's a general storage space for acoustic and visual information, and it kind of acts as a buffer. It kind of grabs onto bits of information from here, and from here, from the phonological loop and from the VISUOSPATIAL SKETCHPAD, and it kind of packages that information, and obviously by reaching into the long-term memory, you can do that as well, and then sends it to the central executive as well, or is given things from the central executive to make sense of the information. It's just a kind of way of making sense and temporarily storing information that you're going to use. I know it's a little bit vague. It's not very helpful. And again, it has limited capacity, because if you think about it, your working memory is taking packages of information and feeding them forward into your speech, your memory, your whatever it is that you're doing, something that you're writing, you're drawing, you're saying, you're doing. So the episodic buffer takes think about episode. An episode is a small package of a time-limited piece of information. So it takes it and then kind of passes it on to whoever needs it. I know, it's vague. There you go. I'm telling you what it is. So here are some true or false questions. Have a go. See what you think. Yeah, it's true. The working memory is just short-term memory, and it's a very dynamic depiction. In the multi-store model of memory shows us structure. It shows us the structure of a version of how and where memories are stored, whereas the working memory is all about movement. It's all about function. It's all about what does your short-term memory do. So it's not so much about storage, it's more about function. So the working memory model, or working memories that work when we were asleep. Oh, I gave you that information too quickly. What do you think about that? Do you think we use working memory? In fact, that should actually be working memory, not working memory model, but you know what I mean. Well, false. We don't use our working memory, pardon me, when we're asleep, because it's all about conscious processing. But if you get a good sleep, you will improve your working memory anyway. So, it's always good to get a good night's sleep. But we're not using it when we're asleep. The central exec monitors incoming data. Is that true or false? Yes, it's like the fat controller. If the fat controller stops controlling the trains, it'll be all carnage and hell will be let loose on the island of Sodor. Are there 3 slave systems in the working memory model? Yes, there are. Phonological loop, VISUOSPATIAL SKETCHPAD, and the episodic buffer. What do we think about this? Is the phonological store linked to rehearsal of what you're hearing, or the voice? Is it your inner voice? False. No. The articulatory control process is your inner voice. The phonological store is where that is put. That is, the acoustic information is stored there. The VISUOSPATIAL SKETCHPAD has a capacity of around 4 objects. So that means, are you able to visualize in your head for, about 4 objects at a time? Or do you think you can see more than that in your head. True. It's very difficult. It's not like this is not like the 7 items plus or minus 2 from the multi-store model. This is more actually being able to visually see in your head more than 4 objects at one time. It is actually really, really difficult. You know, this is not about a memory span. This is actually seeing things in your head at one time. Yeah, so it's different to something like the 7 items plus or minus 2, because that's about being able to recall things up to about 9 items. This is actually seeing them in your head. You try and do it, it's really difficult. So VSS is comprised of the visual cache and the inner scribe. Yes. So we know that the visual cache is the storage, and the inner scribe is kind of what is being written or drawn on your memory about how things look, how they move, where they are, etc. And with the visual cache, you also have some information about form and colour in there. Episodic buffer is a kind of temporary store. Yes, it's very limited. It packages information, and it's a bit like a train buffering. You've got another train analogy. I must be obsessed with trains. It's kind of when trains buffer, you know, that kind of small packet of movement information, whatever, that comes up and then is moved on. I don't really know how trains buffer, but I have heard it on Thomas the Tank Engine. I'm trying to make out I know loads about trains. I don't really. So the working memory model includes long-term memory. Well, there's a box there that says long-term memory, but it doesn't really include long-term memory. It kind of implies that we have a long-term memory without saying anything about it at all. Okay, so who am I? Have a guess. Write down what you think that is. Write down what you think that is. Which part of the working memory model is that? Which part is this? Which part is this? Let's see, were you right? So the first one was VISUOSPATIAL. The second one, central executive. This is phonological, and this is a general store. So you can see here the general store, visual and spatial information, auditory information, directing attention. They're not in the same order as on the other slide, but yeah, that's what they are. How have you been using the latest systems of your working memory? So what did you do in the counting windows task? Let's focus on which part of the working memory you might have been using. I mean, you were actually using more than one slave system, but let's just focus on one of them. Let's focus on the VISUOSPATIal SKETCHPAD. Think about how you use that. Have a go before you look at the what the explanation is. Have a go. How might you have used both elements of the VSS in the counting windows task? So you stored the visual data, the image of your house, its windows, either from if you started from the inside or outside. And the inner scribe would have recorded the arrangement of the objects. It would have set the scene. It would have set it all up for you. And your visual cache helps you to keep score of what the window, how many windows you had. And the whole operation was supervised by the central executive. I mean, you also used your phonological loop because you were counting in your head. Your inner voice was helping you with that as well. Okay, so with the phonological loop, on the calculation task, when you had to sum up the numbers, it was more really the phonological loop than the VISUOSPATIal SKETCHPAD, because it's not a very visual thing, a maths question. It's much more your phonological loop. So your articulatory control system was the inner voice, summing up the numbers and keeping score, and you kept the tally of scores in the phonological store. And again, the central executive helped you to complete that task and stopped you counting when you realised you'd counted all the windows in the house, and it can then stop that task. So we're going to look at a study now. We're only going to look at one study to support the working memory model. we're going to look at dual task activities. I will post something as well on Teams that is another case study that might help you with the working memory model, but for now I just want to focus on this because I don't want you to get too confusing. So dual task activities are something that we can use to test the existence of the different slave systems, the visuospatial, the phonological loop, etc. So the first thing to do is draw a picture while the person next to you talks to you. Now, if you're doing this on your own in isolation, draw a picture of anything, doesn't matter, you can do scribbles if you want, and just talk aloud to yourself. Just say blah, 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 whatever you like, but do it as you're drawing, yeah? Not while you're writing, you have to be drawing. If you start writing, it's a bit different, it has to be a drawing. So read something, get yourself a bit of text, and not out loud, but in your head, keep saying the. And don't cheat by reading a bit, then saying the in your head. Try to repeatedly say the in your head while you are reading a piece of text. So while you are reading, you're also in your head saying the. Again, and don't read the something, the, while, that's not what I mean. You have to do it exactly at the same time. Which task is virtually impossible? Well, I think it's impossible completely unless you cheat. This one. This one is easy. Draw a picture of a flower or a cat or of nothing or a cloud, just scribble and just go blah, blah, blah. It's really easy. There is no problem. You try and read something while also in your head you're saying I'm trying to do it now and I can't read. I can't read what I'm doing. I can't read it while I'm saying the. Why do you think it's impossible, this one? Again, if you cheat and you go read the something the, yeah, you can do it then, but that's cheating. So why is it impossible to do this task, but it's easy to do this task? Have a think. Use your higher level thinking skills. I'll tell you why it's difficult. Because you are overloading one of your slave systems here. You are completely overloading it. That's why. So, if two tasks make use of the same component of working memory, they cannot be performed successfully together. That's why you can't do that. You are overloading the phonological loop. It is the same slave system, the same modality, and you cannot do two tasks in that one modality, in that one slave system, and you can't do two in that one either. But this one, you're using the VISUOSPATIal SKETCHPAD and you're using the phonological loop. You're not overloading one system. Two systems together, fine. One system with two tasks, can't be done. Even if you're Stephen Hawking or the most brainy person in the world, you can't do it. You just can't do it. Your brain literally does not work like that. So, if two tasks make use of different components, it should be possible to perform them as well as together as separately. So, it's the idea of, if you're drawing, you're using your VISUOSPATIal SKETCHPAD. If you're listening to someone talk to you, you're using your phonological loop. If you're talking out loud or thinking in your head, you can still draw. It's not going to interfere with it. Now, you might find if you're writing and someone starts to talk to you, you start to write what they're saying. And that is because you're overloading the phonological loop. Because when you write, you start to speak the words in your head. Even if you don't think you're doing it, you are doing it. So as soon as someone starts talking to you, or the TV's on while you're writing or whatever, you might start to write down what you hear. This is one of the reasons why I cannot revise if there's music playing that has lyrics in. I wouldn't be able to write a good essay or revise or do homework if the TV was on, because I would just find I was too distracted, because my phonological loop would be going clash, clash, clash all the time. So when students say to me, I can revise really well while I'm watching telly, well, no, you can't. And here's the evidence. You see these dual task activities. Right, so that's basically what I've said there. It was overloading the phonological loop. Now, this study is one that is a little bit convoluted. It is pretty straightforward when you read through it properly, but because you're doing this on your own in self-isolation and you're not in class, it's a bit more difficult for you to kind of get a handle on this. So what I'm going to do is I have posted this study on the team that says recorded lessons, where you basically found this PowerPoint. It will be titled 5A Robbins et al. 1996. On there you can see all of the strengths are highlighted in red and why, and green is the limitations of the study and why. So rather than you trying to do it yourself, because I think that might be too challenging for you to do in self-isolation, I'd like you to read through the study and then you can see how I've colour-coded it in terms of evaluation points. So here are some examples that I will show with the class when I do it. So we have, for example, there were 20 male chess players in the sample. That is a small sample. That's not going to be strong data. The data is not going to be robust. It reduces the reliability. And the sample was taken from the University of Cambridge. That's a biased sample. The University of Cambridge contains many people with very high IQs and very high ability. They're basically the top 1% of students in this country because, you know, Cambridge and Oxford are highly selective and they only take students who have scored the highest on their A-levels or IB or whatever. So you need to be aware when you're looking through studies that, you know, if the sample is just a general sample of university students from the University of Washington, USA, okay, they're going to be reasonably intelligent, but this is the University of Cambridge. They're going to be madly intelligent. So it's a small sample. They're all male. You can't generalise to females because they're all male. And they're University of Cambridge students. They're clever. You cannot generalise this to a general population. Yeah? To Fred Blogs or Maisie Blogs down the road or whoever who are not and have never been to the University of Cambridge, or to, you know, other people. So, you know, this is not going to be a generalisable sample. So red, here's the strength of the study. All players had reached a threshold of chess ability, which meant that they played to a high level. That's a strength because the participants are used to playing chess. So the task is suited to them. Now, if I had been one of the participants in this study, it would have been not very good because, yeah, I know the rules of chess. I've played chess before. I'm not a great chess player. I haven't played for years. It's not something I would choose to do necessarily. I don't particularly enjoy playing chess. So, you know, I wouldn't really be a very good participant here because the results would probably be meaningless, you know, because I'm not into playing chess. I'm not interested. So for this study, it's what you might call a purposive sample. They had to choose their sample on purpose. People who get chess, who know about chess. You cannot just go out and conduct this study with anybody. They have to know about chess. So it's a purposive sample. 90% of the participants were under 30 years old. Is this a strength or a limitation? Think about it. Can you generalise to anybody who is over the age of 30? Can you generalise the results of this study to anyone over the age of 30? I'm hoping you're saying, no, you can't. Because if most of the participants are under 30, that excludes anybody over the age of 30 from the results. Okay, we know how highly intelligent chess players who are under 30 might react in this experiment, but we don't know how anybody else would react because they're not in the sample. There's only 20 of them and they're all male. So it's a huge limitation. The issue with this type of research is that they probably couldn't get a bigger sample than that. The procedure is quite time consuming. It was probably quite difficult to get everybody in the same place at the same time and conduct the study. There were 4 levels of the independent variable. That means only 5 participants per condition of the independent variable. So it's we're talking very limited findings here. So when you look at the study, bear all this in mind and don't get too caught up in the detail of the independent variable. The first time you read the study, you might think, oh my goodness, I don't get it at all. The first time I read it, I was like, hang on, I'll have to go back and read it again a few times to really understand it. A lot of psychology studies are like that. You need to just give it time to settle in your brain. I still have problems. You know, I've been doing psychology for yonks. But still, sometimes the way that studies are presented, I think, what did they do? Hang on, how does that work? So don't worry if you read it and think, I don't really get that. We can talk about it when you get back and email me, or we can set up a Zoom meeting if you really are stuck. And don't worry, we will revisit all of these before your exams in year 13. So, I think at this point you need to pause the presentation and just look at the study. Any questions you've got, write them down, but please don't send me 50 questions. I just don't have the time to answer them. Anything that you're really stuck on, we can set up a Zoom meeting or something and we can talk it through, okay? And if there's lots of you, then we could do it as a proper Zoom meeting. Right, okay, strength or limitation of the working memory model. So have a look at these and decide which of these are strengths and which of these are limitations. So it only concerns itself with short-term memory. It's not a comprehensive model of memory. That could be seen as a limitation. Could also be seen as a strength because it's telling us a lot about short-term memory that the multi-star model doesn't. But it doesn't tell us anything about long-term memory. A good evaluation will see a strength and limitation in every single evaluation point, and that's what you've got to get good at. Research support comes from dual task studies. That's a strength, yeah? That's a strength. Dual task studies can be set up and they can show you that the different components, the VSS and the phonological loop, appear to exist. Dual task studies are lab experiments and therefore lack ecological validity. As soon as you see the word lack, you know it's a limitation. They're not real behaviour, they're artificial. The Robbins et al. Study, how often were those participants in their day-to-day life told to look at a chessboard, memorise where the pieces were while either doing nothing or doing some weird interference task? Yeah, it's not real. PET scans have shown that different areas of the brain are used while undertaking verbal and visual tasks. That's a strength because it's really helping us to see that the brain may organise information according to whether it's visual or acoustic, and this may be then assigned to different memory functions. So that's a definite strength. It's a more credible model than the MSM. So it looks at temporary storage and active processing. That is definitely a strength. I don't really think you can see that as a limitation, actually. That's just a clear strength. The function of the central executive cannot really be tested or measured. Yeah, the central executive and the episodic buffer are vague. I mean, there probably is something in the memory that is assigning different tasks. How you measure it and find evidence for it, well, the Robbins study tried to do that a little bit, but not really massively successfully, in my opinion. It doesn't explain changes in processing ability that recur as a result of practice or time. Yeah, it doesn't. It kind of says this is what your working memory is and what it can do. It doesn't suggest you can change that, improve it, or, you know, that it may change over time. So it's a little bit inflexible there. Extremely influential model. Well, that tells you everything you need to know. That is obviously a strength. You will never ever hear psychology lecturers, professionals, professors talk about short-term memory. They'll only talk about short-term memory if they're talking about the multi-store model of memory. They all refer to working memory. And actually, if you are an educational psychologist working with children who are struggling, you will talk about they may have damage to their working memory or delay in their working memory. They won't talk about short-term memory. So it's a huge influence. And that's it. We've actually come to the end of this show. So do look at the Robbins study. It's on the same team as you found this one, and adios for now.